Jalen Vance was 37 years old, a refinery operator from Tulsa, Oklahoma, who brought home a steady but unremarkable $72,000 a year. That salary had been enough to build a life he thought was solid, a life constructed on shift work, overtime, and the simple belief that hard work paid off. Now standing in the echoing marble-floored hallway of the Tulsa County Courthouse, that belief felt like a joke. The judge's words were still ringing in his ears, a pronouncement that felt less like a legal ruling and more like a demolition order for his entire existence, $3 million. He was ordered to pay his soon-to-be ex-wife, Kelly's, $3 million. The number was so absurd, so disconnected from the reality of his life, his 2014 Ford F-150 with 157,000 miles on it, his $280,000 mortgage on a modest three-bedroom house in Brookside, his well-worn Red Wing work boots that cost $200 and were meant to last a decade, that it didn't even feel real. He felt a strange, detached numbness, as if he were watching a movie about someone else's ruin. Across the courtroom, Keyless hadn't flinched. When the judge announced the figure, her expression had been one of serene, vindicated acceptance, as if she were merely collecting a debt long overdue. Her lawyer, a man in an $8,000 Armani suit, gave her a subtle, congratulatory nod. Jalen's own public defender, overworked and underpaid, had simply sighed and shuffled his papers, the fight already gone from his eyes. Jalen looked at his own hands, the knuckles scarred, and the skin permanently stained with a faint layer of grease that no amount of industrial soap could ever fully scrub away. These were the hands that had paid for the life Kellis had just systematically dismantled and sold for parts. He had no idea what was coming, but in that moment of crushing defeat, he felt utterly and completely alone. Have you ever felt like your entire world was pulled out from under you by the one person you trusted most? It's a feeling of vertigo and betrayal that cuts deeper than any legal judgment. Let us know in the comments if you've ever faced a moment that tested everything you thought you knew. The life they built had started simply enough. They met at a church barbecue, two people from different parts of Tulsa whose paths weren't supposed to cross. He was quiet, steady, a man whose rhythms were dictated by the roaring furnaces and intricate pipe systems of the Sand Springs refinery. His world was one of pressure gauges, safety checks, and 12-hour shifts that left him bone-tired but satisfied. Kellis was different. She worked in marketing for a small local firm, a job that seemed to involve more lunches than labor. She was radiant, ambitious, with a laugh that could fill a room and a way of looking at him that made him feel seen for the first time in his life. She'd called his work noble back then, a word that felt strange and elegant on her tongue. Their first home was the 1,800-square-foot house on South Peoria Avenue in Brookside, a neighborhood of older homes with sturdy oak trees and a quiet, settled feel. The down payment, a hard-won $56,000, had come entirely from his savings, scraped together from years of overtime and living in a cheap apartment that always smelled like his neighbor's cooking. Kellis had contributed her design expertise, which meant picking out $4,000 worth of restoration hardware furniture and a $1,200 Persian rug that he was constantly terrified of staining with his work boots. He didn't mind. Seeing her happy, seeing the home she created felt like a worthy investment. He remembered the day they closed on the house. He'd just come off a night shift, his eyes gritty with exhaustion. But he met her at the title company in his cleanest work shirt. She was wearing a crisp, white $400 dress and looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. As he signed the mountain of paperwork, committing himself to a 30-year mortgage with a monthly payment of $1,650, she squeezed his hand. "We're building a real life, Jay," she'd whispered, her eyes shining. He believed her. He believed every word. The first few years were a blur of domestic normalcy. He'd leave for the refinery before sunrise, packing a lunch in a beat-up Coleman cooler. He'd come home to the smell of whatever new recipe Kellis was trying, her laptop open on the granite countertop she'd insisted they install for $7,000. They'd eat dinner while watching some show he didn't care about, her feet tucked under his leg on the sofa. On his days off, he'd mow the lawn with his trusty $350 Honda mower, fix the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, or change the oil in her car, a used Honda Accord they'd bought for $14,000. His life was an accumulation of small, practical acts of service. That was how he knew to show love. But slowly, things began to change. The change was subtle at first, a shift in tone, a new vocabulary of desire. Her $200 Michael Kors purses were replaced by $1,800 Gucci bags. Her shopping trips to Target became excursions to Saks Fifth Avenue at Utica Square. She started talking about their friends' lives, the lawyers, the doctors. She'd mention their European vacations, their new Audis, the second homes they were buying at Grand Lake. Her comments were always casual, dropped into conversation like stray thoughts. Can you believe Sarah's husband bought her a Cartier watch for their anniversary? It was only $8,000. His $72,000 salary, once a source of pride and stability, began to feel like a limitation, an anchor holding her back from the life she felt she deserved. The word noble was retired from her vocabulary when describing his job. It was replaced by words like dirty and limiting. She started asking him not to wear his work clothes in the house, to leave his boots on the back porch. One evening, he came home, tired and sore, after a particularly grueling shift dealing with a valve malfunction, and found her in the living room with two of her friends. He walked in, and the conversation stopped. Kellis looked at him, at the grease on his jeans and the fatigue on his face, and gave him a tight, forced smile. "Jalen, honey, maybe you could go shower before you join us," she said, her voice light, but the message was clear. He was an embarrassment. He was the grimy foundation of her beautiful life, a foundation she preferred to keep hidden underground. He just nodded, turned, and walked upstairs, the smell of her expensive $250 diptyque candle filling his nostrils, a scent of luxury that suddenly smelled like shame. The true corrosion began the year his grandmother, Eleanor, got sick. Eleanor Vance was the woman who had raised him, a pillar of quiet strength with a garden that was the envy of her neighborhood, and a laugh that sounded like home. Her illness was swift and merciless, a cancer that stole her vitality piece by painful piece. Jalen spent every spare moment at her small, tidy house in North Tulsa, the house his grandfather had built with his own hands. He'd sit by her bedside, reading to her from the Bible or just holding her hand, its skin as thin as paper. Kellis's visits were brief and infrequent. She'd stand in the doorway of the bedroom, her designer purse clutched in her hand like a shield, a pained expression on her face. "It just smells so much like illness in here," she'd murmur, as if it were a personal affront. Her questions were never about Eleanor's comfort or her pain. They were probes, cloaked in feigned concern. "So, is her estate all in order?" she asked one evening as they drove home. "Did she have good financial planning? People of that generation were so practical." Jalen, his mind consumed with grief, barely registered the questions. "She has a will, Kellis. Everything is taken care of." "Good," she'd said, a little too quickly. "That's good. It's important to be prepared." When Eleanor passed away, the grief hit Jalen like a physical blow. At the funeral, he stood numbly, accepting condolences from friends and family. Kellis stood beside him, a perfect picture of a grieving granddaughter-in-law, in a severe but elegant $1,200 black dress. She held his arm, but her touch felt performative, her whispers of, "I'm so sorry, baby," lacking any real warmth. He was too lost in his own sorrow to see it for what it was, a rehearsal. 2 weeks later, the will was read. Eleanor, a woman who had saved every extra dollar from her job as a school secretary, had left behind a surprisingly substantial estate. Her paid-for home was valued at $150,000, and her investment portfolio, carefully managed for over 50 years, was worth just over $1.2 million. She had left it all to Jalen, her only grandson. He felt a wave of gratitude and overwhelming responsibility. This was his grandmother's life's work, a legacy of thrift and prudence. He planned to use a portion to pay off their mortgage and invest the rest, just as she would have wanted. When he told Kellis, her reaction was strange. There was a flash of something in her eyes. Not happiness for him, but a sharp, calculating glint. "Wow, Jalen. Over $1 million, she said, her voice a low hum. "We could do so much with that. We could finally get out of this neighborhood, buy that house in Maple Ridge we looked at." The house in Maple Ridge was a $950,000 new build with a wine cellar and a 4-car garage. "Kellis, this is my grandmother's money," he said gently. "I want to be careful with it. I want to honor her." "Honoring her means living a better life, Jay," she'd snapped back, the politeness vanishing. "Don't be so provincial. This is our chance." He had no idea that her definition of our chance involved a plan that had already been set in motion. The first official notice of the betrayal arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a process server to the main gate of the refinery. The security guard, a man he'd known for 10 years, had to call him down from the cat cracker unit. He walked to the gatehouse, his hard hat in his hand, and was handed a thick manila envelope. The guard looked away, a silent gesture of pity. Standing there, in front of his co-workers, with the smell of sulfur in the air, Jalen tore open the envelope. Divorce papers. The words blurred together, a soup of legal jargon and accusations that made his stomach turn. Irreconcilable differences was the least of it. She accused him of emotional cruelty, of sabotaging her career opportunities, of financial mismanagement. The list of demands was breathtaking. She wanted the house, its contents, her car, and lifetime alimony. And then there was the final demand, a cash settlement of $3 million for her pain and suffering, and for the lost potential her marriage to a simple refinery operator had caused her. It was a fantasy, a work of pure fiction, and yet here it was, stamped and certified by the court. He called her from the parking lot, his voice shaking. "Kellis, what is this? $3 million? Are you insane?" Her voice was cold, rehearsed. "It's what my lawyer thinks is fair, Jalen. You held me back for years. You were content to live in that little house with your greasy hands and your simple life. I'm not. I deserve more." The second betrayal arrived a month later, this time by certified mail to the house he now lived in alone. It was from the law firm managing his grandmother's estate. He opened it, his hands clumsy. It was a formal notice of a claim filed against the estate. The claimant was Kellis Davenport. She was suing his dead grandmother's estate, alleging that Jalen had made a verbal promise to give her half of his inheritance, a promise he had supposedly made in Eleanor's presence. It was a lie so audacious, so monstrous, that he had to read the document 3 times to believe it. She was coming at him from 2 different directions, a coordinated legal assault designed to strip him of everything he had and everything he was set to inherit. She was not only divorcing him, she was trying to rob his grandmother's grave. The deposition was the lowest point. It took place in a sterile conference room in a glass tower downtown. Jalen sat beside his court-appointed attorney, while Kellis sat across the table with her high-powered lawyer. She was wearing a cream-colored silk blouse that probably cost $500, and she looked directly at Jalen with eyes full of manufactured pain. For 3 hours, she wove a tapestry of lies. She spoke of his fits of rage, his controlling behavior, his dismissiveness of her dreams. She cried on cue, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She described the fictional conversation where he'd supposedly promised her half the inheritance, adding vivid, heartbreaking details about how his grandmother had smiled and nodded, giving her blessing. Jalen sat in silence, his hands clenched into fists under the table. He listened to the woman he had loved for a decade describe a man he didn't recognize, a monster of her own invention. Every word was a calculated strike, designed for maximum effect. He felt a cold, hard knot form in his stomach. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something else, something colder and more resolute. He looked at her, at this stranger sitting across from him, and he finally understood. This wasn't a divorce. It was a heist. And she had made a critical mistake. She had underestimated him. She saw a simple man covered in refinery grime. She had no idea that working with volatile chemicals under immense pressure teaches you a thing or two about patience, precision, and the devastating consequences of a single overlooked detail. The day of the judgment was gray and overcast, the Tulsa sky the color of dirty dishwater. Rain threatened but never fell, trapping the city in a humid, oppressive stillness. Jalen sat in the courtroom, the wooden bench hard beneath him, and listened as Judge Miller delivered his ruling. He spoke of Kellis's compelling testimony, her evident emotional distress, and the financial disparity between them, a disparity made vast by Jalen's recent inheritance. The judge, a man with tired eyes and a reputation for being sympathetic to the wronged woman, had swallowed every lie. Therefore, the judge concluded, his voice booming in the quiet room, this court orders the defendant, Jalen Vance, to pay the plaintiff, Kellis Davenport, the sum of $3 million. A gasp went through the small gallery. Kellis's sister and a friend, seated behind her, exchanged a triumphant look. Kellis herself simply closed her eyes for a moment, a small, beatific smile on her lips. Jalen felt nothing. The number was still too large, too abstract. It was like being told you'd been struck by a meteor. The mind simply couldn't process it. His lawyer patted his shoulder weakly. "We can appeal," he whispered. But they both knew Jalen couldn't afford the legal fees an appeal would demand. He walked out of the courtroom in a daze, past Kellis, who refused to meet his eyes. He didn't want to talk to anyone. He just needed air. He pushed through the heavy wooden doors and made his way down the wide marble steps of the courthouse, heading for the south parking lot where his F-150 was parked. It was 11:42 a.m. The clock on his phone confirmed it. As he rounded a row of cars, he heard a sound that cut through his numb haze. It was a loud, celebratory pop. He stopped. There, not 50 feet away, standing beside a gleaming new white BMW 3 Series, a car that must have cost at least $43,000, was Keeley's. She was with her lawyer, her sister, and another friend. In her hand was a bottle of Veuve Clicquot, the distinctive yellow label unmistakable. A thin wisp of smoke curled from the mouth of the $65 bottle. Her sister was holding out champagne flutes. Kellis threw her head back and laughed, a shrill, unrestrained sound of pure victory. The sunlight, finally breaking through the clouds, glinted off the bottle and the expensive watch on her wrist. $3 million was the minimum, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. Honestly, after everything he put me through, I deserved more. Her lawyer chuckled, raising his glass. To a new beginning, Kellis. You played it perfectly. Jalen stood frozen behind a concrete pillar, watching them. He saw her pour the bubbling liquid, her hand perfectly steady. He saw her take a long, deep drink. He saw the undisguised greed and triumph on her face. This wasn't a woman grieving the end of a marriage. This was a predator celebrating a successful hunt. The numbness inside him finally receded, washed away by a tide of ice-cold clarity. He watched them for another minute, imprinting the scene onto his memory. The cheap champagne in the expensive car's shadow, the laughter that sounded like breaking glass, the absolute certainty of her victory. Then, he turned and walked away, his footsteps silent on the asphalt. He got into his truck, the cab smelling of old coffee and honest work, and pulled his phone from his pocket. He didn't call Keyless. He didn't text her. He called his other lawyer, the one Kelly's didn't know he'd hired weeks ago, the one handling his grandmother's estate. Ava Chen answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm, precise, a stark contrast to the chaos in his head. "Jalen, I saw the ruling, I'm sorry. You need to see this, Ava," he said, his own voice low and steady. He described the scene in the parking lot, the champagne, the laughter, the words he'd overheard. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. When Ava spoke again, her voice had a new edge to it, the sound of a strategist seeing the final pieces of a puzzle fall into place. "She's arrogant," Ava said, "and she's sloppy. That's good for us. Jalen, did you ever tell your divorce attorney about the claim she filed against the estate?" "No," he said. "You told me not to. You said to keep the cases separate. To let her think I was only fighting on one front." "Good," Ava said again. "And she never mentioned the estate lawsuit during the divorce proceedings? Not in any filings? Not in the deposition?" "Never," Jalen confirmed. "She acted like the divorce was her only source of potential income. She cried about being left with nothing." "I'm looking at the court filings right now, Jalen," Ava said, the sound of keys clicking softly in the background. In her preliminary declaration of disclosure for the divorce, she had to sign an affidavit, standard procedure. It's a sworn statement under penalty of perjury, listing all assets, debts, and any other pending legal actions. On line 7C, list any other lawsuits or legal claims you are currently a party to. She checked the box that says none. Jalen felt his breath catch in his throat. "She lied, Jalen," Ava said, her voice devoid of emotion. "She committed perjury. She filed a fraudulent document with the court to win that judgment. She just handed us the gun, the ammunition, and a signed confession." She paused. "Go get a coffee. Sit tight. Don't answer any calls from her or her lawyer. Let her enjoy her celebration. I think it's going to be a very short party." Jalen drove to a small diner on 11th Street, a place called Tally's Good Food Cafe that hadn't changed in 50 years. He slid into a worn red vinyl booth and ordered a black coffee for $2.75. The waitress, a woman with kind eyes and a tired smile, set the heavy ceramic mug down in front of him. He wrapped his hands around its warmth, the simple, solid feel of it a small anchor in a world that had come unmoored. This was the part Ava had coached him on, the part she called strategic restraint. His every instinct screamed at him to act, to call Kellis and unload the years of resentment, to confront her with her lies, to rage against the injustice of it all. But Ava's instructions had been absolute. Let her make the first move. Let her believe she's won. An opponent who thinks they're invincible is an opponent who makes mistakes. So he sat. He sipped his coffee and stared out the window at the traffic passing by. He was playing dumb by doing nothing at all. His silence was a weapon she wouldn't see coming. He thought back to the months leading up to the trial, the moments he had played this part without even realizing its full strategic value. There was the mediation session, held in a bland office building that smelled of stale air freshener. Kellis had sat across from him, weeping as she told the mediator how she had sacrificed her career for him. "I have nothing," she'd sobbed, her voice thick with self-pity. "He's going to get over $1 million from his grandmother, and I'll be out on the street. I have no other claims, no other source of income to hope for." He had sat there, his heart pounding, knowing that a formal claim with her name on it was already lodged in the probate court system just a few blocks away. He'd looked at his divorce lawyer, who knew nothing of the second lawsuit, and saw the pity in his eyes. He'd simply said, "That's not true, Kellis," but offered no details, no evidence. He let her lie hang in the air, a documented, witnessed falsehood. Her lawyer had patted her shoulder, glaring at Jalen as if he were a monster for questioning her pain. Then there was the phone call, just 2 weeks before the final hearing. She'd called him late at night, her voice thick with what he now recognized as manufactured desperation. "Jay, I can't sleep. I'm so scared. How am I going to survive? I have no money, no prospects. You're destroying me." He had wanted to scream, to call her a liar and a thief. Instead, he'd taken a deep breath and said, "The courts will figure it out, Kellis." "But it's not fair," she'd wailed. "You have everything, and I have nothing." He'd said nothing more, just listened to her perform her victimhood, each word another thread in the web of deceit she was weaving. He hadn't known then exactly how it would end, but he had trusted Ava's counsel. Collect the evidence, document the lies, wait for the right moment to reveal the truth. Her arrogance was the fuel, and her lies were the kindling. All they needed was a single spark. His phone buzzed on the table, jolting him back to the present. A text message from Kellis. He looked at the screen. It was a picture of her holding a champagne flute, the Tulsa skyline behind her, taken from the top floor of some expensive restaurant. The text underneath read, "Celebrating my freedom. Guess you'll have to sell that rusty truck now. Checks can be made out to Kellis Davenport. Don't be late." He stared at the message, at the sheer, unadulterated contempt in it. A year ago, that text would have broken him. Today, he felt a strange calm settle over him. He took a screenshot of the message and forwarded it to Ava Chen with a single word: fuel. Then, he put his phone on silent, turned it face down on the table, and ordered another cup of coffee. The trap was set. Now, all he had to do was wait for it to spring. The spark came from the most unexpected of places, a diligent court clerk named David Riley. David was a man in his late 50s, a 20-year veteran of the Tulsa County court system. He was meticulous, methodical, and possessed a near-photographic memory for case numbers and names. At 12:04 p.m., the formal order for Judgment 23-DV-781, Davenport v. Vance, landed on his desk for processing and release to the respective attorneys. He began the standard procedure, entering the details into the system. He typed the plaintiff's name, Kelisdavenport. A faint bell of recognition chimed in the back of his mind. He'd seen that name recently. On a whim, he ran a system-wide search. 2 files popped up. The first was the divorce case he was currently processing. The second was a probate case, PB-2023-812, a claim against the estate of Eleanor Vance. He opened the probate file. The claimant was Kelis Davenport. The defendant was the executor of the estate, Jalen Vance. David frowned. It was unusual, but not impossible. He pulled up the hard copy file for the divorce case, his fingers expertly flipping through the reams of paper until he found what he was looking for: the plaintiff's preliminary declaration of disclosure. He scanned down the page, his eyes landing on Section 7C, a sworn affidavit signed by Kelis. List any other lawsuits or legal claims you are currently a party to. The box next to none was checked. David sat back in his chair, the worn leather groaning in protest. He looked at the probate claim, filed 2 months ago. He looked at the divorce affidavit, filed 1 month ago. The contradiction was stark, undeniable, and committed under penalty of perjury. He wasn't a judge or a lawyer, but he knew what this was. It was fraud upon the court. He picked up his phone, his duty clear. At 12:07 p.m., Ava Chen's direct line rang. Ms. Chen, David Riley from Judge Miller's office. Can you confirm your client in the Vance estate case is the same Jalen Vance from the divorce proceeding that was just ruled on? Ava's voice was pure steel. Yes, Mr. Riley, he is. And is the claimant in that probate case, Kellis Davenport, the same individual who is the plaintiff in the divorce case? Yes, she is. There was a significant pause on the other end of the line. Thank you, Ms. Chen. The judge has been notified. He requests that you and your client, and Ms. Davenport and her counsel, return to his chambers immediately. The judgment order has been stayed pending this meeting. Ava disconnected the call and immediately dialed Jalen. It's happening, she said, her voice sharp with urgency. The clerk found it. The judge has stayed the judgment and he's calling an emergency meeting in his chambers. How fast can you get back to the courthouse? Jalen was already on his feet, in throwing a $10 bill on the table. 5 minutes, he said, his heart hammering against his ribs. Meanwhile, at the French Hen, an upscale restaurant in Utica Square, Kellis was holding court. She had just ordered a second bottle of Dom Perignon, a $350 indulgence, and was regaling her sister and friends with plans for her new life. First, I'm hiring an interior designer for the new condo. Nothing from the old house is coming with me. It all reeks of him, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. Her phone buzzed. It was her lawyer, his name flashing on the screen. She answered with a triumphant lilt in her voice. Tell me more good news. The voice on the other end was frantic, panicked. Kellis, there's a problem, a huge problem. The judgment has been stayed. Judge Miller wants us back in his chambers, now. The smile vanished from Kellis's face. What do you mean, a problem? We won. I have the court order right here in my purse. I don't know what happened, but the clerk called me and sounded serious. It's not a request, Kellis. It's an order. Get back to the courthouse, now. The ride back downtown was a blur of confusion and growing dread for Kellis. By the time she and her lawyer rushed into Judge Miller's chambers, Jalen and Ava Chen were already there, seated calmly, waiting. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Judge Miller sat behind his large mahogany desk, his face a grim, unreadable mask. He wasn't wearing his robes. The formality was gone, replaced by a cold, quiet fury. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He held up 2 file folders, one blue, one red. Mr. Davies, he said to Kellis's lawyer, are you aware that your client, Ms. Davenport, is currently the plaintiff in an active claim against the estate of Eleanor Vance in probate court? Kellis's lawyer's face went white. He turned to look at his client, his eyes wide with disbelief and horror. No, Your Honor, I was not aware of any such claim. The judge's gaze shifted to Kellis. It was heavy, accusatory. Ms. Davenport, he said, his voice dangerously low, I have here a sworn affidavit signed by you in which you declare under penalty of perjury that you are not party to any other legal claims, and I have here a separate claim filed by you seeking a significant portion of Mr. Vance's inheritance. These 2 documents cannot both be true. Can you explain this discrepancy to me? Kellis opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked from the judge to her lawyer to Jalen, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. The color drained from her face. She began to stammer. It was a misunderstanding. I didn't think... It wasn't a formal lawsuit, just a claim. A claim filed in a court of law. Demanding monetary compensation is a lawsuit, Miss Davenport, the judge said, his voice like chipping ice. You lied. You lied to your attorney, and you lied to this court in a sworn legal document for the express purpose of financial gain. That is fraud. He picked up his gavel, the sound of the wood hitting the desk echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. The $3 million judgment in case 23-DV-781 is hereby vacated in its entirety due to fraudulent misrepresentation by the plaintiff. Furthermore, I am instructing the clerk of this court to file a formal referral with the Tulsa County District Attorney's Office for 1 count of perjury. This meeting is over. Kellis let out a small, strangled cry. Her lawyer just stared at her, his face a mask of professional ruin. Jalen stood up, nodded once to the judge, and walked out of the room with Ava Chen at his side. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. In the space of a single hour, Kellis's $3 million victory had turned into a career-ending, life-altering catastrophe of her own making. The celebration was officially over. The collapse was as swift as it was total. Kellis's world did not just crack, it atomized. The consequences cascaded down upon her, each one a direct result of the greed and deception she had embraced. The first and most immediate consequence was financial. The $3 million judgment, the foundation of her future, had evaporated. In its place was a mountain of debt. Her lawyer, furious at being professionally compromised and publicly embarrassed, dropped her as a client that same afternoon. His final act was to send her a bill for his services, totaling an astronomical $150,000, with a note demanding immediate payment to avoid a lawsuit from his own firm. The new BMW 3 Series, which she had leased with a $5,000 down payment scraped together from credit cards, was now a $700 a month liability she had no way of affording. The credit cards themselves, which she had maxed out to the tune of $35,000 in anticipation of her windfall, were ticking time bombs of interest and fees. The legal fallout was even more severe. 2 weeks after the hearing, a formal charge of perjury was filed against her by the district attorney's office, a crime that carried a potential sentence of up to 5 years in prison. Her name was in the local paper, a small article detailing the vacated judgment and the subsequent criminal referral. The public humiliation was absolute. Her probate case against Jalen's grandmother's estate was summarily dismissed with prejudice by the probate judge, who cited the fraudulent conduct in the divorce proceedings. She would not get a single penny of Eleanor Vance's legacy. Her social world disintegrated overnight. The friends who had toasted her victory in the courthouse parking lot suddenly stopped answering her calls. Her sister, who had been her staunchest supporter, now saw her as a toxic liability. They had a screaming match over the phone, her sister shouting, "You lied to me, Keyless! You made me a part of your crime!" before hanging up and blocking her number. The invitations to galas and fundraisers, the lunches at upscale restaurants, it all stopped. She was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about in the circles she had so desperately wanted to join. Jalen experienced this collapse through a series of increasingly frantic voicemails she left on his phone. He never answered, but he saved every one. The first one came that evening. Her voice was confused, angry. "Jalen, what did you do? You manipulated the judge. This isn't fair. You owe me that money. Call me back right now." The second came 2 days later. The anger was gone, replaced by a pleading tone. "Jay, please? I made a mistake. I was getting bad advice. We can fix this. Just tell the DA it was a misunderstanding, please. My life is falling apart." The third, a week after that, was just sobbing. A long, painful minute of incoherent crying, ending with a choked whisper, "You've ruined me." He listened to them once, then archived them. He felt no satisfaction, no triumph. He just felt a profound and weary sadness for the person she had become, and a quiet, steely gratitude for the justice that had been served. The system he had thought was broken had, in the end, worked exactly as it should. It had punished the lie and upheld the truth. He deleted her number from his phone and began the work of rebuilding his life, not with a fictitious $3 million, but with the quiet dignity of his own two hands. 1 year later, the sun rose over Tulsa, casting a golden glow on the intricate steel labyrinth of the Sand Springs refinery. At 6:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning, Jalen Vance was already there, a hard hat on his head and a genuine smile on his face. The air smelled of industry, a scent that had once been a source of shame in his marriage, but was now the smell of purpose. He wasn't on the clock. He was volunteering. After the divorce was finalized, on his terms, with him keeping the house and every cent of his inheritance, he'd felt a strange emptiness. The fight was over, and he had won, but the battle had left its scars. He needed something more than just his shift work. He found it in a new apprenticeship program at the refinery, mentoring young men and women just starting their careers. He would spend his Saturdays teaching them how to read pressure gauges, how to safely bleed a line, how to respect the immense power they worked with every day. He found a deep, unexpected joy in it. He saw himself in their eager, nervous faces. He saw the same hope he'd once had, and he felt a fierce desire to protect it, to guide it. He was passing on the knowledge that had been passed to him, the practical, tangible wisdom of a trade that kept the lights on and the country moving. His hands, still calloused and scarred, were now tools of instruction, pointing out a valve, demonstrating a technique, offering a steadying presence. He kept the house in Brookside. After paying off the $224,000 remaining on the mortgage with a small portion of the inheritance, it was truly his. It was quiet now, but it was a peaceful quiet. He filled the silence, not with things, but with life. He replanted his grandmother's favorite rose bushes in the front yard. He adopted a rescue dog, a scruffy terrier mix named Gus, who now followed him everywhere. He heard about Kellis sometimes through the faint whispers of the grapevine. She had avoided jail time for the perjury charge, pleading guilty in exchange for probation and a hefty fine she had no way of paying. She had lost the BMW and had been forced to declare bankruptcy. The last he heard, she had moved back to her parents' house in a suburb of Dallas, working a retail job at a department store, her dreams of a life of luxury reduced to folding sweaters for $14 an hour. He felt no ill will towards her, only a distant pity. She had chased a number, a phantom of wealth, and had sacrificed her character, her integrity, and her future in the pursuit. He now understood what true wealth was. It wasn't a dollar amount in a bank account. It was the pride of a job well done. It was the gratitude in a young apprentice's eyes. It was the quiet satisfaction of owning his own home, free and clear. It was the legacy of his grandmother, not in the money she left, but in the values of honesty and hard work she had instilled in him. As the morning shift change whistle blew, one of the young apprentices, a bright young woman named Maya, came over to him. "Thanks for staying late to help me with that schematic, Jalen. I really appreciate it." "Anytime, Maya," he said, smiling. "You're getting the hang of it." She handed him a small folded piece of paper. "It's just a thank you card. My little boy drew a picture on the back." Later, in the quiet of his truck, he unfolded it. On one side was a simple, heartfelt note of thanks. On the other was a child's drawing rendered in brown and blue crayon. It was a picture of a refinery, with a stick figure in a hard hat standing proudly in front of it. It was a drawing of a hero. The ultimate lesson is that character is the only currency that can't be devalued. People who chase money without integrity often end up losing both, while those who build their lives on a foundation of honest work and decency find a richness that no court can award or take away. Thank you for joining us on Love Beyond Pride. If this story of justice and quiet strength resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories about overcoming betrayal and finding true purpose.